I'll tell you one thing already that's not that great is that I used a shallow dish for ink, which is what I usually do. And you really need something deep that you can put into like a bottle.
That's why it's called an ink well.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Stationery Test Drive, where every week we take handsome stationery tools out for a test. I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal. And in today's episode, we're exploring the Speedball and Hunt dip pens.
These are very handsome tools, sexy tools if you want to call them that, which I do. We don't have a lot of experience with these, at least I don't as an illustrator, but whatever little I've used, I really do enjoy them. And yeah, Minjal, you have this is the Hunt. I think it's the classic Hunt 102, I want to say, or the Hunt 512 actually. It's written in very small engraving, fine engraving on that.
The reason we don't know this for sure is because this pen holder and this nib are about 30 years old.
Yeah. So tell us that story. Where did you get these? This one.
This particular one, when I was in school and in the old days, kids, we had magazines. We've spoken about this before.
I will demonstrate while you...
And growing up in the Gulf during that time, you would get American magazines and they would often have ads for correspondence courses. And one of them was for cartooning.
It was like YouTube tutorials but on paper.
Yeah, a time before YouTube and art forums and things like that. So I signed up for one of these, and the best thing I got out of that course, the course itself was fun, but the best thing I got out of that course was an entire pack of stationery to begin with. And this Hunt pen and nib were part of it.
Minjal, what about you? Where did you find this Speedball version?
So as a lettering artist, I've been experimenting with different writing tools for calligraphy. While I do use Pilot Parallel pen and the flat edged markers for the sheer convenience. A lot of professional calligraphers will swear by dip pens and these really fine nibs that they come with. Now, I got this one Speedball dip pen as a set. So what you get is the holder, and you get 4 different nibs, which are different sizes. And the thing I've noticed with the Speedball or any dip pen is that there is, a definite learning curve.
I would say it's a big learning curve, but it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's not as easy as just picking up a pen and, lettering.
I'll tell you one thing already that's not that great is that I used a shallow dish for ink, which is what I usually do. And you really need something deep that you can put into like a bottle.
That's why it's called an ink well.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I have a couple of ink wells here. I have this Winsor & Newton Black India ink, which comes in a very nice bottle, which is so nice that I've never opened it. And that's a problem. What I did use, and I have used a lot, is this thing, which is a Sumi drawing ink from Daiso.
Which we should cover at some point.
Because I've used the same bottle for 5 years, and I think it's maybe halfway down. And it is from a dollar store, so yeah, somewhere in the world you might get it for $1 or $2. Speaking of 30-year-old things, here is Hunt Speedball Super Black India ink, free-flowing, non-clogging, waterproof. The problem is it's 30 years old and we have not used it since then.
It is so waterproof that it's lost all its water at this point.
Yeah, there's nothing in here. But beautiful designs, all of them. We're as much fans of the designs of our stationery as we are the actual use of the stationery. But I love these. I've used them for a couple of drawings. I've not used them very well. And well. There's another pun. Here's another thing where I've not used it well. I think maybe you'll have a better time with these ones, the calligraphic nibs. Minjal, do you want to hazard a try on that? See, look, there. I'm not even... There you go.
See, there is a difference when you use the pointed nib and you use a broad nib like the one I'm using. Now, Speedball, the nibs, they actually come in different, there are several series, if I may say so. There is a Speedball A, which is broad, broad-edged, square-tipped nibs. There's Speedball B, which has a round section at the head of the nib. There is Speedball C nibs, which are very popular with calligraphers who practice a lot of broad-edged calligraphy. Then there is Speedball D, which actually is an oval-shaped nib.
Gee, I wonder why.
And Speedball E, which is actually a steel brush. So
steel brush.
I mean, as lettering artists across the world, I think Speedball is one of the favorite dip pen makers for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were the kind of premier American brand for sure, but I think the thing that really set them apart and made them a staple was, I believe, the book that they introduced.
So this was somewhere around 1913. The book was launched by Ross F. George. Now,
That's a made-up name. Come on.
No. The book also mentions it.
Is it a pen name?
Well, so what Ross F. George did was, he was also a lettering artist. He was the one who actually launched, the A series of nibs somewhere around 1913. So the Hunt Company collaborated with George, and then they launched these various, the various nib sizes. But what he did, George, was also that, he would publish periodicals like this one, where, he would showcase not just the different tools, but, different lettering scripts by artists who were around.
Right.
A lot of scripts that he actually, came up with, and they were part of the book. I believe Speedball launched its 25th edition last year. What I have with me is the 24th, but the 25th is already out.
And even as someone who's not been a calligrapher but was interested in illustration and the comic world, this is considered to be like the Bible if you are into dip pens.
It is really, the book is, they call it the textbook, and it's not really as pedantic. It is really a great resource to learn from, and all the possible scripts that you could use with, say, maybe a pointed pen or a broad-edged pen, you can learn from this one book.
It's actually, I mean, this is an aside, but it's an interesting parallel that I think in the 1800s and 1900s, this was a very common thing amongst instrument and writing instrument makers, where they would manufacture the instrument, but also then make the books and the pamphlets and the instruction to go along with it. And in many cases, it was the instruction that sold more and made them more popular than...
Yeah. Well, that is smart marketing, is it not?
Yeah. I think the reason I bring that up is that we wrote a story about this in one of our newsletters, which you can sign up for at our website, inkymemo.com. There was a German manufacturer who did the same thing. He invented his own script based on an older medieval script called Rundschrift, German, and also invented the nibs that go with it. And the books and the nibs were almost as popular as each other. So this is an interesting way that, stationery people have kind of marketed their work.
And if you're a lettering artist, for sure get one of these books. It's really worth the money. Should we actually also now get down to what, we made with the dip pens?
Just as soon as I finish this thing that I've made with this, which is quite a nice pen, and I was not surprised to get this sort of double line at the end of the reservoir.
Well, since we've been playing around with the broad nib, I think, Minjor, you should show us what pens like these are, traditionally designed to do.
be careful because the ink stays on there for quite a while, and I don't want you to.
That is lovely.
Yeah, that is a lovely example of literally the A to Z of.
This is the Fraktur script.
Fraktur, F-R-A-K-T-U-R, I believe.
That's correct.
Also German.
It's written at an angle of 40 degrees.
Okay.
So you would essentially hold.
I would be very careful.
And I will be very careful. So you hold the pen at this
why
angle.
Why do you show us that? Because
the ink, I believe, has kind of dried out.
But better. It's always that last point where you think it's dried out. That look, it's got more to give.
Yes. So this is the angle that the script is written at 40 degrees. And like I mentioned earlier, for somebody who uses mostly the very convenient Pilot Parallel pen, this is, it takes a little while because you have to constantly keep dipping the pen in your ink source.
And which ink did you use?
Now, I think everybody on the show will hate me, but I will say it one more time. I use the Ecoline inks. Which I use for most of my calligraphy work.
We really should do an episode on that.
We have to get to that soon.
Well, we've done 25 episodes and I've spoken about the Ecoline almost in every episode.
I think we're getting the hint now.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think the point I wanted to make there is that the Ecolines are closer to a fountain pen ink in that they are water based or
they are somewhere between a fountain pen ink and a Sumi ink.
Because Sumi, like this one, the eyes still haven't dried. And it's kind of tacky, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring up in that once you lay down enough here, and especially in the thicker strokes, you can actually feel it in relief on paper.
Yeah, because Sumi inks have carbon black in them, which are actual particles of pigment.
Yeah.
And so they're not something that just kind of the paper absorbs, but it actually sits on top of the paper.
So the thing with these dip pens is, the hairline strokes. It is impossible to get some, I may not have gotten the lines as fine as, the professional artists do, but the hairline strokes that you manage with the dip pen, really, it's impossible to get it with any marker or
absolutely.
Anything else.
And even more so with something like the Hunt 512, I think, or 5, yeah. So this one is basically like a needlepoint. I have stabbed myself with this several times.
On purpose?
No. But yeah, you get, and we saw it in our test paper, just the most fine line. And I'll come back to this point because in my test, again, with the theme that you may be familiar with on this show, this is all done with the Hunt 512. I used this Sumi ink. Of course, or maybe I used another drawing ink by Camlin or one of those. That's for the black, which you can literally, if you want to, this is dry, so you can literally feel this.
It's kind of a relief.
And I also use Sheaffer, sepia and teal inks, which are the blue and the browns. That was it wouldn't hold the reservoir as long because they're thinner inks, they're fountain pen inks. This one goes down, and I wanted to mention that, and you'll notice this when Samir shows his, that it's very good at putting down these small hair-like lines, and also putting down some very nice calligraphic lines.
I think
I didn't. Samir, you can finish your point. I just wanted to say that I did not really use this to its best extent. I put down too thick a line, too even a line, which is fine for trying to make something graphic, but really if you've seen previous things that I've made in this style of these bottles, I made them with round tip and flat things like marker pens and pencils, mechanical pencils, and I think subject is something that you need to choose properly with these. I didn't give this the right kind of treatment is what I wanted to say. It's a bit too even. I just leaned into just mechanically putting down lines, which you can do, but it kind of sucks the life out of something like this. There's precision, but then there's also monotony. And I think this, obviously it's not fully monotonous, but it kind of goes towards that end. To talk about the actual life that you can breathe into something by using it very precisely, but using that hairline and leaning into that hairline. Samir, why don't you show us yours?
I tried to do something that's as lively as I could get. And that's what I came up with.
That is fantastic. And I think that is a true use of these two, especially, or the true uses of these two nibs.
Yeah, so Minjal's used the broad edge, and I've used only the sharp nibs.
The pointed
pen.
Yeah.
So what I did was a lot of these, like the background and the colored bits, are using Minjal's favorite Ecoline inks.
Mm-hmm.
And this worked out really well with that. And the grays are actually a diluted Sumi ink, which Vishal likes to keep around.
So you basically, you take, literally, this is now a drop of Sumi ink, you put in some water in there, and you're fine with washes.
So the interesting contrast I'm seeing with Vishal's is because Vishal used a pure Sumi ink, you can feel the ink on the surface.
I went down heavy, and for a reason, because I kind of wanted it to have this stamp and printmaking quality, but I don't think it's as successful as the subtleties that you can get.
But the thing I think is common about the dip pen, no matter how you use it, is that it does have a texture to it, no matter what you use.
Or what.
So Vishal's got kind of a raised relief, and because I used much thinner inks, mine's almost kind of ingrained into the paper, so you can still feel it.
It does gouge into most papers. These are rougher papers. Maybe on the Rhodia pad, I'm guessing.
No, that's just copy paper.
Okay, so but it's a smoother paper. It might work better for those. I should try these on other papers.
It's not just the process of writing with this that's very tactile, because you have to keep doing that dipping action. But what you end up with is also quite tactile.
Right. So yeah, I'm not unhappy with this. I think it looks fine, but honestly, I wonder why it doesn't look any different to me than if I'd done it with those cheap sketch pens that I'd used on the previous one.
But that's exactly what we've been saying, that this is not an instrument that you can take to and get in all its complexity immediately.
Right.
It's going to take you a few tries to kind of really lean into what it's good at.
Like, we found this in our packing a few months ago. It was in an old box. And I think I did a portrait with it that I was quite happy with it. I'll put that on screen if I have it. In that one, I think I had gotten into the rhythms of it well enough. There's obviously a huge range and a huge ceiling for what it's able to do in illustration especially. I'm sure there are countless artists who have used and continue to use quill pens like this every day to produce artwork of varying degrees in cartooning, in comics, in illustration. But I think we have given this enough of a range. Are there any things that we would like to warn people against other than the fact that you could be stabbed by this thing?
No, I think it's just as an instrument, it's a very, very versatile instrument. I think pretty much any dip pen you get, even like at a beginner level, is already kind of much more professional than anything else you'll use.
It is at the intermediate level. Let's not fool ourselves. They will sell it as a beginner's pack, but see, all lettering artists will tell you that you cannot start with a dip pen. You start with something that is much easier.
And to start with something much easier, check out our episode on the Staedtler markers.
And the Unipins, if you want something that's fine.
Or the DOM sketch pens, which were great for something like this. Stationery Test Drive, we are here to provide all these answers for you.
So the thing that we try to cover through this is the use of sort of humble tools. And the fact is that there are a lot of humble tools these days that give you a range of effects. A dip pen is not a humble tool. Even if you get one for cheap, it is a tool that requires a lot of investment on your part. It's not something that you can just kind of pull out of your bag and get to work with immediately and get great results with. You really need to kind of struggle with it a little before you understand how to use it. It requires a lot of maintenance. You need to make sure your nibs are clean. You need to make sure they're not rusting.
They're washed.
You need to, oil them when you store them away for a while so that they don't disintegrate over time. This is not an easy tool.
But that's what makes it good, I think.
And coincidentally, we made the same comment about the reed pen, which is also a dip pen.
Yeah, it's basically exactly the same thing, only made of bamboo and without a reservoir. So this is the, if that was the primitive Bronze Age, this is clearly the Iron Age, at least, if not the Renaissance or
I believe dip pens have been around since Roman times, but because metal was so difficult to work with back then, it was an elite.
It was made of one of these guys.
Yeah, so it was metal dip pens.
Oh, right.
So metal dip pens were around since the Roman times, but they were made out of copper alloys and things which were difficult to work with. So metal dip pens as a mass thing didn't happen until the 1800s. And then they kind of, took over from quills, and fountain pens came soon after. So they didn't have a very long life as far as being the main writing instrument.
There is a bit of resurgence, at least in the lettering community now.
And the comics community has basically had them as a de facto. To the point where that's why when he did the course, he got this one, and this is a standard.
I think illustrators have never completely stopped using them, because there's just a certain range of effect you can get once you know how to use it. Which you can't get with the easy to use pens.
It's very much like musicians, where you hear of musicians saying, "Oh, I learned so much when I switched back to acoustic instruments, or I learned so much when I went to electric instruments." There are people who spend years on markers and then switch to dip pens, and it's a revelation. I know I've felt some of that, so I know that it's not all in their heads. There's also groups of people like me who skipped the dip pen entirely and went to brushes. And brushes have a very lively way of doing the same kind of things. We'll cover those as well in the future, because acrylic brushes and using brush for illustration is a wonderful, lively line. That's kind of where this is as well. It's a lively line that you can get while still having a very precise metal instrument. I think we've gotten enough life out of these in all our experiments here, in our test drives. Anything else to add?
It's just definitely an instrument that all of us want to use more of.
Yes,
absolutely.
It's a huge challenge to use one, but the results are just worth it.
Yeah. And I think one other thing that is worth it is subscribing to this channel, maybe liking this video, following us on social media at the links that are on screen and in the description. As Samir said before, please subscribe to the Inky Memo newsletter, where every week we talk about, not every week, but whenever we put out a well-researched and well-thought-through entry, it's about the history of tools, anecdotes, stories, stationery, and fun. And we hope you had fun with us. We will be back next week with more tests of fun tools and interesting tools and historical tools. Until then, I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
Stab away.